Hey everyone, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with 5 Minutes with Ben. We're doing a recap of Game 11 of the Gukesh Ding match. Sorry, Karen and I were away for a few days. We were at Cherokee, North Carolina playing poker. And now we're back. So I'm going to do recaps of the other games too, but it might take a day or two to get them all out. But anyway, we have most interesting game since I've left. Gukesh was white, Ding had black. This is game 11. And before this game, the score was tied 5-5. Okay, Gukesh played a little differently than he has before, knight f3 and c4. Liren played the most testing move, d4. Black can also play c6 and e6 and take on c4. Those are all viable alternatives. And Gukesh, for the first time in a world championship, got this new position on move 3 with b4. And this is played occasionally, but it's not very popular at the top level, but it's very interesting. So we have sort of a reversed Benko, Benoni kind of structure. And Ding made it a Benko by playing c5. So now this is a straight Benko reversed where white has an extra tempo. If it was black's turn in this position, it would just be a Benko, except color's reversed. So it's a Benko with white having an extra tempo. Okay, white played the most aggressive move, e3, attacking the center. Black's center is attacked everywhere. He ignores it with knight f6. And this position, Gukesh played a move the engines don't like very much, but it's a fine move, a3, defending his b4 pawn. Bishop g4, pinning the knight. Which is not a fan favorite of the engine, but you can develop a piece. They traded on d4, h3, attacking the bishop. They traded. Now, white's queen is attacking the b7 pawn, so Ding played queen c7. And in this position, Gukesh made what I consider the first mistake of the game. Should play c5, and white is slightly better. White has the two bishops. They have this weird pawn structure. But he played d3, which looks good. You know, get the pawns out, get the bishops out soon. Black played a5, which is an excellent move, and it puts pressure on the b4 pawn. Black is threatening to capture on b4 because of the pin on the a file. And whether white plays b5 or takes messes up white's pawn structure a little, because after b5, which makes more sense than takes, leaving white an isolated a pawn, we're giving away the c5 square. And we always like in Benkos and Benonis when we haven't moved our knight here early, because sometimes it can get attacked. And often the c5 square, or if you're white, the c4 square is a better square for your knight. So he plays knight bd7. White wants to get his bishop to the diagonal because bishop on e2 is very passive. So he plays g3. Knight goes to c5. And this baffled me while I was driving home. I was like, bishop g2, why can't black play knight b3? And the answer is, you can play knight b3, but the engine slightly prefers white, although I really prefer white. Bishop takes queen, bishop c6 check, either knight d7 or king d8. I'll play king d8, but knight d7 is possible. And now we sacrifice the exchange of bishop b2, and this is a good exchange sack for white. White has the two bishops, and more importantly, white has two connected passed pawns on the queen side. White can easily develop with knight d2, a4, knight b3, putting pressure on these pawns. And those passed pawns are going to last forever. So the engine likes white here. And I guess the players did also, because Ding didn't do that. So instead of playing knight b3, Ding played knight fd7, solidifying his knight on c5. Now black really is threatening knight b3 because of the aforementioned variation I gave. White had to play bishop c6 check. Bishop c6 isn't check now. So now knight b3 is a serious threat. Okay, white castled. Now white's defending the bishop. So knight b3, attacks the rook. The rook can move away. Played knight e5, which is an excellent move, centralizing the knight with a fork. Queen f4, pinning. And the idea is, if black takes the d-pawn, then white takes the d-pawn. So Ding made the best move, rook d8. In this position, The engine already thinks black has a clear advantage. It doesn't like the way white's played the opening. White doesn't have any queenside development. Black has nice positions for their knights. And D-pawn's really nice. And the bishop's not really hitting on anything here. Okay, so Gukesh defended his pawn, rook D1. You can't take with this knight because your queen's hanging. So that would be bad for the world championship. And if you take with this knight, then your knight on E5 is pinned. So rook D1 defends the pawn. In this position, there was some discussion in the Grandmaster chess world about the move H6, with the idea of playing G5. The white queen doesn't have a lot of squares. And when I say it doesn't have a lot of squares, it doesn't have a lot of squares. G5 is a very annoying threat in this position. Black has the advantage. Another good move for black is E6. So black can play bishop D6, again harassing the white queen. Ding played a more solid choice, which lets white back in the game, G6. Not a bad move. White played A4. Black put it in H5. Black wants to play bishop H6. That's a fine move. Gukesh played a really interesting move in this position. You'll notice Gukesh hasn't developed his queen side yet, and he played the move B6. You can't take the pawn because your knights would be not defended on E5, so you have to play queen D6. Now, white wants to use the open B file and get a knight to B5 probably. White plays bishop A3 because the bishop on C1 wasn't doing very, very much. Bishop H6 attacking the queen. The queen doesn't have a lot of squares, so he took the knight on C5 attacking the black queen. Queen takes, and then queen E4. Now, white's threatening to take the pawn on B7, have a passed B pawn, so knight C6. White played knight A3, finally developing his queen side. And here, black played an inexact move. He was worried the queen would take this if the knight ever moves away. So he defended both of his pawns on the 7th rank that are potentially or currently attacked by the queen. Rook D7. Knight C2. Nice square for the knight. And here, Ding made a mistake. Ding should just castle, and I think it's about equal. Maybe black's a little better, but he took on B6. I don't like accepting this pawn sacrifice because we give white all this Benko kind of compensation. Rook B1, queen C7, rook B5. White has tremendous play on the queen side. Finally castles. And in this position, Gukesh played a move not recommended by the engine, but it shows how deeply super GMs and world champions think about chess. Played a move most class players would never consider. The knight on C2, it can't go anywhere good. And sometimes you think to yourself, where would I like that knight if I could put it anywhere on the board? And there's a couple of good squares that I see. There's C5 and D5. If I could just magically move my knight there, that would be quite nice. I don't know how to get the knight to D5, even with a series of maneuvers. Yeah. I can't. I mean, I could play knight E1, knight F3, king H2, knight G1, knight E2, knight F4, knight D5. But that seems a little far-fetched. Okay, so instead he got the knight to C5. I'm sure you can see how the knight can get to C5. Much easier than D5. Played knight A1. Unusual move, but it worked out tremendously. White wants to play knight B3 to C5. Black played a very passive move, which the engine doesn't like. The engine wants to play F5 and play something aggressive. Ding played rook B8, which is the opposite of aggressive. Knight B3, here comes the knight. E6, here comes the knight. Knight C5, and rook B1. Obviously, comparing this position to the position a few moves ago where Ding captured the pawn on B6, white has tremendous compensation for a pawn. The B7 pawn looks really weak. All of white's pieces are perfectly aggressively placed. Black is super passive. This position, the engine says white's better by about 0.4, and black should give the pawn back with knight B4. And white is better, but not winning. And instead, Liren made the biggest blunder of the match, and was actually forced to resign immediately. So the game ended on on a quick note here, so easily the biggest blunder of the match, he played queen c8. And if you haven't seen the game yet, white's a play and win. So pause your video, and this is like a puzzle rush kind of tactic. White wins in one move, and the game ended. So pause your video if you haven't seen the game already, and try to figure out the winning move for white. And reason it's a winning move is because black played queen c8. If the queen was on c7, then white actually couldn't play this move. But the queen on c8 allows it. It's queen takes c6. Okay, so there's two variations to calculate. Queen takes queen, bishop takes queen, white's up a piece. That doesn't need a lot of calculation. And if you take with the pawn, because the queen is on c8, you're going to lose your queen now. If the queen was on c7, black would just play king g7 or something. And once black loses the queen for the rook, white is again up a piece. So for a world chess championship, from the world chess champion, queen c8 is a pretty bad move because queen takes knight ends the game. The game's over. So white was clearly worse out of the opening. Then white equalized. Then white seized the initiative by playing knight a1, knight b3, knight c5, which is beautiful. And Ding fell apart immediately once they were getting into some light time trouble. So Gukesh wins. It's the first win since game 3, which Gukesh also won. For the first time in the match, Gukesh is ahead 6-5. There's 3 games remaining, and I'm sure the end's going to be exciting. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. This has been at least 5 minutes with Ben. I'll say 13. And please like and subscribe and leave a comment. It helps the channel out tremendously. And I'll see you guys more next time with more World Championship recaps. Bye, everybody.